Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another in our ongoing series of book launches and author talks, or in this case, co-editor talks. Tonight we're here to celebrate the, I'll get it all right side up. I'm letting man with the Budweiser beer can. The book Queen of the Hillbillies about May Kennedy McCord. So I've been down in the Ozarks now 10 years, and pretty soon after I got here, as soon as you get interested in the Ozarks, names like Vance Randolph and Otto Rayburn and May Kennedy McCord are just going to crop up as you read around about the Ozarks. But really, the first time I encountered May Kennedy McCord in a serious way was when I was intently interested in the life and accomplishments of John T. Woodruff, and I ran across the famous brouhaha confrontation that happened at the Kentwood Arms, 1934, I believe it was, where Woodruff, who was uncharacteristically, he was a quiet person by and large, but he sort of lit into Vance Randolph and May Kennedy McCord for what they were doing. And of course, I was intensely interested in Woodruff, but I thought, boy, that was kind of strange of him to do that. And I didn't sort of assume that these were bad people, but that was my first encounter. And then more recently, when I was very intently interested in the Ozark Jubilee and what KWTO was doing in the 40s, especially, that led up to the launch of the Ozark Jubilee, Corns a Crackin', and some of those other shows. So I was intently going through the KWTO dial to see what I could find out about people like Slim Wilson and Junior Haworth, and one of my favorites, Goo Rutledge, and Zed Tennis. So whenever I'd encounter one of May Kennedy McCord's pieces in the KWTO dial, I would just like zip right over it, because I'm pretty sure she didn't have anything to say about the lead up to the Ozark Jubilee. And then the third thing was Wayne Glenn gave us a copy of the company that did Crossroads Television, Crossroads TV Productions, which did the Ozark Jubilee. They also did some pilot programs for other things. And one of the things they did was a rustic game show called Pig in a Poke. And if you've never heard of or seen Pig in a Poke, you ought to go watch it, because one of the contestants vying for like a slab of bacon and was all cuts of pork, and if you got the whole pig, then you won the grand prize, was May Kennedy McCord. And so I'd encountered May Kennedy McCord quite a bit, but I've never really, as far as I know, and somebody can shout out if I'm wrong, she never compiled any of her articles into a book. So this is a great wrong made right. And I've started reading my copy. They arrived late last week. So it's been on my nightstand for many nights. And I'm of that age where if I get through 10 pages before I'm too tired, I'm going to bed, going to sleep, it's a good night. So I've been working through it, but I'm amazed at the quality of the writing. She's very engaging. She's witty. So let's hear some more from these co-editors, who are also Patti McCord, who is May's granddaughter, one of her granddaughters, only granddaughter, and Kristine Sutliff, who is a retired professor of English here at MSU, have co-edited this book. And so let's turn it over to them. Please join me in welcoming these two wonderful co-editors of a very good and much needed book.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. I'm going to be paranoid that I don't have the right thing behind me when I'm clicking around, so I'm going to prance around a little bit where I can see you and the screen too. This has been a long 6 or 7 years that we've spent collecting and rummaging through and organizing and cutting and editing and punctuating and deciding what to do with spelling and things like that. Patti and I have worked from afar for the most part. She lives in California and I live here. So we couldn't have done this back in the days before we had free long distance. I mean, you don't even hear the term long distance anymore because you just don't think about it. But we couldn't have done it back when it should have been done. We couldn't have done it even if we'd had the idea. But Tom's right, she never collected her stuff, and that was the problem, and that's what's given us a new purpose in life for a while. We're tuckered out and going to stop now, I think, though. But this is May, and it's one of both of our favorite pictures of her. Patti and I had, ever since we started talking about this, we believed that the University of Arkansas Press was where we most wanted this to be. They've done more with scholarly Ozarks stuff than any other place. And we had a list kind of in order of where we'd go, and I suppose we would have cranked it out by hand ourselves to make, after getting it all together, to get it in other people's hands and get it on a shelf somewhere. But we felt like she belonged with Vance Randolph and Otto Ernest Rayburn and Mary Elizabeth Mankey. And so we wanted her to be on a bookshelf with them. And so we were very pleased when the University of Arkansas did take an interest and chose to put us in the Chronicles of the Ozarks series that's edited by Dr. Brooks Blevins, who teaches here in our history department and teaches, he's a Noel Boyd Professor of Ozarks Studies. He was very excited about the book from the get-go. He told me the first time he read through it that if the University of Arkansas publishes this, and if I have anything to say about it, they will, he said. And so that made me feel pretty confident that maybe we were going to score. But these are some comments he's made about it. From the Depression days through the Eisenhower era, no Ozarks observer has reached a larger audience or boasted a more loyal fan base than did May Kennedy McCord. And I think that's kind of amazing, considering that her name has, to a large extent, dropped out of sight. Because she didn't collect her stuff, and it's scattered kind of hither and yon, a bit like May was herself. Brooks also said those outside the Ozarks might have been more familiar with Randolph and Rayburn, but back in the hills and the hollers in the middle of the 20th century, no one rivaled her celebrity. McCord was regional royalty, and we are glad to welcome the Queen back to the realm. I like that. Those are all from Brooks. Who, by the way, is a wonderful editor and has been great support and answers queries immediately. I'm always a little bit annoyed when somebody is as good at what they do, which I don't have that side of my brain, but they're also as good as I am at what I do. Yeah? And I'm not a historian, and I don't have 40,000 University Press publications, and so I'm no Brooks Blevins, nor will I ever be. But he could be a Chris Sutliff. I mean, he can edit anything, and he edits it well. So that's enough about Brooks and the Ozarks, or the University of Arkansas, though. May was, I say in my preface to the book, that she was an Ozarks treasure, and I really believe she was. I just love, Tom alluded to her witty and her way with words, wittiness. You can't go wrong in the Ozarks, she said. She loved the Ozarks, and she said, you just can't go wrong with it. There's always something to do. There are rabbits to track and nuts to crack. Yeah, and that's right. I like that line. She was, we're very indebted to her for preserving so much of our history and culture. So I think it's unfortunate that she didn't write a book, even though some of her contemporaries urged her to do so, but she didn't need to. She had a husband who made her a good living. She didn't need to publish for money. She was busy doing her thing. She was out campaigning for Dewey Short. She was speaking at rodeos and singing at ball games and things like that. And so she didn't want to stay home and work on a book and collected all that stuff together. And she had no ego about it. Otto Ernest Rayburn, for whom she wrote his magazines, said May could find fun in swallowing a fishbone. And that's right, I think. That's a good line, too, even though that's not hers. But this, I'm getting ahead of myself. I guess I don't have a slide in there that I thought I did. I guess I just have it in my mind. when I said she doesn't have an ego, she got a letter from the editor of the Saturday Evening Post saying, the next time you write an article, would you send it to me and let us look at it? You know, we give us first crack at it. Do you think she ever sent him an article? No. What did she do with that letter? She turned it over and wrote her grocery list on the back of it. Buttermilk, spinach, strawberries, butter, cream, and lard. And it was found, I think, in a pigeonhole on her desk. She just, that's how, and if I got a letter from the Saturday Evening Post saying, we want something of yours, I'd give you all copies. I would have it put on bookmarks, and we'd have it in this book. May was a trailblazer. She kept her maiden name after she married, and that wasn't common. I don't think as I was growing up, I ever knew anybody who did that. It just wasn't a thing. But it was for May. She traveled across the Ozarks and the state and even the nation, usually by Greyhound bus or by the Frisco Railroad on her own, by herself. She established a career after her children were grown. She was really, I call her the PR manager for the Ozarks and for Ozarks stuff, Ozarkiana stuff. I've got to use the word stuff somehow. She spent her time promoting the Ozarks and the people she loved who were Ozarkers. She believed that nobody could own folklore, that it needed to be shared. And I think that's one reason she didn't collect her stuff too. That maybe seemed to her like she was kind of getting us all together here and it was hers. She thought it should be shared, and so that's how she spent her time, sharing it. And she did it, she reached more people than we will because she was on the go all the time. Patti has a good line about that from May's husband. I remember when I was a kid, my family listening to May on the radio. My dad was an over-the-road trucker, but when he was home, we listened to May Kennedy McCord. And I can still see him and hear him saying at the end of the show, that May, she's sure a character, and she sure was. And so I just regret that I didn't get interested in Ozark stuff. I don't think I had a serious thought in my head till I was 30 or thereabouts. And growing up in the Ozarks, I didn't appreciate the Ozarks. And I kicked around, went to school in Arkansas and taught at Texas A&M and moved back here when I was 29. And I remember my first fall on campus walking around and seeing all these beautiful trees. And we had mesquite trees in College Station, Texas, but I didn't miss the Ozarks when I was in Arkansas and Louisiana and Texas. When I came back, I thought, why didn't I? And loved it since. But I didn't get back or get into Ozarks until May had already died. So I just wish I could have been a fly on the wall at those music parties, though, at 817 North Jefferson, because I know they were fun. She would say, bless your hearts, here I am again. Bad pennies will bob up, And it's a delight when a bad penny like May does bob up again. I've enjoyed getting to know May through her granddaughter's eyes. And I've told Patti numerous times how jealous I am that May was her moo-ma, And I loved my grandma, but she was no moo-ma. And so that's why this picture's in the book. It's my dad. We were going to have, in our hunting and fishing chapter, we were going to have somebody hunting and fishing. And so I thought, here's my chance to get a tiny piece of this action. So I groveled to Patti, and she graciously let me have my dad's picture in the book. Vance Randolph wrote to May in 1956, and after he'd been begging her to collect her stuff, if you didn't have such a mental block against writing books, I could show you how to make a book out of extracts from your columns. It'd be very little work, and it would sell like hotcakes. I could write a solemn little introduction telling the citizens what a fine gal you are. The hell of it is, most of the readers know all about you, and they'd say, but who's this fellow Randolph? Yeah. Now, don't tell Gordon McCann we said that. But that's how I think Randolph understood her stature among them. He and Otto Ernest Rayburn and Mary Elizabeth Mankey and Rose O'Neill, and some of them ran around together, and they would pick each other's brains. You know, one of them might say, "Could you send me a ballad about this?" Or do you know any poems about that? Or what's the second verse of some song? And May knew, but they helped each other. We do take issue, though, with this. It would be very little work. It was years, I'm telling you. I don't know how many millions of words there are to start with of May's stuff. But when we got our first manuscript, finally, we thought, we're here, we've arrived. It was about 180,000 words. And I took it to Brooks Blevins, and he said, "Oh, this is wonderful. We're excited." But university presses wouldn't go for anything this long now. We're kind of on hard times, and plus, who wants to read a 900-page book? So he said, "You're going to have to get it down to 120. We spent, that was in, well, we spent right at a whole year. It was October, and until the next October, we spent on the phone. I mean, we'd say, "Okay, we're going to go through these pages, and we'll talk at 3 o'clock Thursday," or whatever. And we spent a year cutting it down to 120,000, only to package it up and send it off and be told, "Well, now things are even tighter, and you got to get it under 100,000. And I said, "We just can't spend another year on this." That was October, and I said, "We're going to give it to them December 1st. So we promised December 1st. And we just pretty much lived and breathed it. And we got it. We got it done. So we do think that Randolph was not right about that. We hope he's right that it'll sell like hotcakes. For one reason, we want to be rich. No, we're not going to be rich. We're not noble. We just both really believe in May and in Ozarks Studies. We will have all of our royalties are set to be sent directly to the Missouri State University Foundation to go into a scholarship that we, 99.999% Patti, have already established in May's name, and in fact it's already being given out. So we're excited about that. So buy lots of books, put them on your Christmas list, and give them to everybody you know, because you'll be supporting students at Missouri State. They have to be either minoring in Ozarks Studies or a graduate student who commits to doing a seminar paper or a thesis or some major project in at least Ozarks Studies. We'd love it if they do it with May Kennedy McCord. Okay, my time's up, as May would say.
Okay, who was May Kennedy McCord, and what did she contribute? I've described my grandmother as the troubadour of the outfit. She was the one who just went around all over the country and spoke to groups wherever she could find people who were interested in talking about the Ozarks. She never learned to drive a car, as we talked about earlier, and she would hop on the bus or maybe a train or hitch a ride with somebody. And I remember people who used to be around all the time who were her drivers and take her to places like the Nixa Fishing Day and Sucker Day and these kinds of events that she was always loving to go to. One day, my grandfather, Papa, was interested in buying a new car, and the salesman said to him, "Now here's a cute little runabout you might like." And he said, "Oh no, I've got one of those at home." And she was all over the place. Fortunately for their relationship, he was a salesman, so he was out a lot too, in case you wondered how she was free to go all over the country by herself. So there was kind of that dynamics that was going on. I've been asked, in fact, it was Caitlin who asked me, if while I was growing up, I realized that she was so well known. Well, of course not. She was just my grandmother. Often on a Sunday afternoon, my brother and I would be sitting on the front porch in our little swing, and up came a taxi cab, and she would get out unannounced. And we knew then that the evening was going to be very special. Sometimes she would bring her guitar, but more commonly she would just come and play her piano and we would sing. And then on a hot summer night, we might be sitting out in the yard and she would just pick up an old leaf and whistle a tune. So those were just exceptional memories to have had. That, as my brother used to say, she really brought the wisdom of the elders to us. And it was a treasured life that few people have been able to share. and so I'm happy to be writing the book and sharing what I can with other people. May loved life and all people, especially her people. She loved songs and poetry and dancing and swapping stories with her friends. She had no patience for conventions that got in the way. One of my favorite memories from my childhood was her wisdom that you should spend your limited time on this earth doing what's important to you. And as an example, when I would be at her house for family dinners, and toward the end of the evening, the mothers would sort of start to stir, as they do, to try to clean up the kitchen. And she would say, no, girls, I don't get to see you often enough, and the hired girl will be here from Galena on Wednesday. So fetch me my guitar, let Junior play the piano, and let's enjoy the rest of the evening. And then if you went over there on Monday or Tuesday, the dishes were still on the table. Her home was constantly full of visitors. I recall more than one time when people came, sometimes unexpectedly, and she would be, of course, absolutely thrilled to see them. And she would pull down her guitar, and they laughed and sang old ballads and swapped stories until late into the night. And such gatherings in her home were very, very common, often with characters that were just so enchanting to me as a child, like the old Polish sea captain and the man who kept getting his beard caught in his fiddle, and the lady with no teeth that sort of spit on you like all the time, and then the old undertaker who had a stubby cigar and cussed with every word, every sentence. As a child, though, I would fall asleep with all this was going on very late into the night, and some poor soul would sort of pick me up and take me in and drop me down to bed. And then in the morning, my mother would come to pick me up, and Muma would say, "We had a feast of a visit last night." And she did. I've been asked how I happened to get involved in writing this book in the first place. Well, there was a box of her material that had kind of gotten passed around from family member to family member. And one day I was in the garage and I was looking at that thing and I decided to see what was there. So I opened it up and there were old manuscripts, yellow columns that she had written, letters from people like Vance Randolph and Carl Sandburg and Mary Elizabeth Mankey. And it just seemed like somebody should organize it. So I started doing so initially, thinking to do so just for my own children and maybe my grandchildren. But then I realized that was her life's work. And as I got into it, I realized she had written for so many different magazines, some totally out of print. You know, the newspapers, there were articles in newspapers where reviewers had been to lectures that she gave and quoted from her. And then, of course, there were all those ballads at the Library of Congress. So it seemed to me that somehow or another, all of that stuff needed to be organized. And then I happened to be in Springfield working on another project, and I met Chris. And
we just talked about how it was a shame, you know, and she said, "Well, I've got this stuff. I just don't quite know what to do with it." And I said, "Well, somebody ought to collect that and, you know, put it in a book and get it out there." And she said, "Yes, somebody ought to." And then we kind of looked at each other and said, "Well, where do we start?"
Right, exactly.
So she finished that project that she was on, and I finished a couple of projects, and we dug in. But I don't think either of us dreamed that it would
take
take as long as it did.
Yeah. But while we were reading her material, I found that she was really different than, say, Vance Randolph and some of the others who wrote about the Ozarks. Because what they would do, which was actually very good, they would interview people and then they would rewrite and, you know, amalgamate into a story. But May didn't do that. May believed that there were many people in the Ozarks who had their own words that needed to be heard, and that many of them were actually writing for various newspapers and publications, and that they deserved to have their own voice spoken in print. So when she first started her column in Springfield with the newspapers, she said, oops.
Oh, I'm going backwards. Sorry.
This is a new column, and it's going to be yours as well as mine. Tell me what you know about this hillbilly. We never tire of learning about him. Come on, hillbillies. Let's get together. Let's rave about it. Write some poetry and some essays and some love letters to the hills. And she did. And when people sent in their stories or their love letters to the hills, she always left, she didn't edit it. She wanted the authentic voice of that person to be in print, and she always credited it to them. So she would give their name and the hometown of the person who sent it in. And in our book, in the endnotes, you'll find some biographies of some of these people. Not all of them, but some of them. And then throughout the book, you'll see names of other people who were, again, probably generally unknown these days, but who were writers or poets, and they contributed to these articles.
So if you, after you buy the book tonight, may go home and find some of your ancestors' names in there. Or I don't even remember who it was, but somebody was looking at the book the other day and said, and it was some city in Arkansas, and said, that's where my family's from. And I said, well, poke around. You know, that's probably not the only one from Pocahontas, Arkansas, or wherever it was. So maybe some of you will find somebody that you know.
May spent a great deal of time working through writers groups and folk festivals and other organizations such as the Ozark Hillcrossers. And I will always think that one of the contributions that she made was as a member of those groups, as someone who helped encourage the other members to do their own writing or poetry or ballad singing or whatever it was, as well as just kind of being the person who helped organize and put them together. So I think that she was a force among those people, and I'm not talking just about the Vance Randolphs and the names that we all remember now, but the other people who were just as important, but whose names are just not known anymore.
Well, we're going to very quickly, I promise, zoom through the chapters and try to give you at least one little tidbit from each chapter. Some of them merit more than one. But in the introduction, you'll find that she was not just the queen of the hillbillies, she was also known as the first lady of the Ozarks. And she just, you know, think about what that means, how well known she had to be at that time. That's May when she was 5 years old. She was born December 1st, 1880 in Carthage, and then her family moved to Galena when she was age 6, so just a tiny bit older than that. They moved to Galena, and that's where she grew up. The 1900 census has her still living at home in Galena and teaching music, and she would have been 19 at that time. She hung around Galena, I think, for another year or so, and then she went to St. Louis and got a job as a stenographer and would go, I think she spent most of her time up there at that point. Later, when she would go back and forth weekly when she was on the radio up there, but when she took that job, her first grown-up job, she stayed for a while. But then she came back for Christmas in 1902, and on January 3rd that year, her extended Christmas vacation, she married her childhood sweetheart, Charles McCord. He was the son of the family doctor. Not the family doctor, the town doctor. Probably the family doctor, but the town doctor. They lived in Galena at first, and then they lived in St. Louis for about 6 years. He worked for the Shapley Hardware Company that was headquartered in St. Louis, and so they were up there. But he was a salesman over the Ozarks area, and he would take a buggy and on Monday morning and go out and sell his wares. And May, when they were first married, she would stay in Galena, and when they were back in Galena, I guess, after the years in St. Louis, she'd stay in Galena. And they lived close to the center of town, and she liked that. She liked being in the center of everything, and she was sort of the town organizer. what do they call those people now? It's always some, the event planner and all that. That's what May was for the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Methodist Church and all the social organizations. And she often traveled with her father-in-law, Dr. McCord, out in the country for him to deliver a baby or see sick people. And that's where she learned a lot of her cures and remedies because she traveled with him. And here is her father-in-law in front of his house with his buggy that May rode with him. I think that's neat. That's a neat picture. Nice house. I assume it's a nice buggy. I'm not up on my buggies. But the country people generally, well, often at least, trusted the old grannies more than they trusted the doctors. So I think that he liked taking May with him because sometimes she could work wonders that he couldn't. Anyway, in 1918, the Shapley Company decided they were going to move Charles McCord to Springfield and have him be in charge of things up here for the hardware company. And May really hated leaving Galena. She said when we were forced to move, almost with a club, I thought my heart would die within me. Almost would I rather have been taken out on the hill of my little hometown and planted beside my beloved ones. She was heartsick to have to move to Springfield. But after she was here for a few years, but here I've made my friends and pitched my tent and loosed my shoes and found my sky. I love it. So I'm glad Springfield kind of redeemed itself. By 1930s, her writing career was underway. She was writing for Otto Ernest Rayburn's Ozark Life and Arcadian Magazine. And she was getting enough of publicity and name for herself that the Springfield newspapers recruited her to come and write for them. So she did, started in October of 1932, and over the next 9.5 years, she wrote, and the newspapers changed their names, and one was morning and one was afternoon, and I'm not going to try to keep all that straight. But over that 10 years, she wrote at least weekly columns and bi-weekly columns, and for more than a couple of years, she wrote 3 times a week columns in the Springfield papers. So Hillbilly Heartbeats, her column, it got called that when she was writing for Rayburn's magazines, and she decided to keep that name for her column when she came to the newspapers. It became a forum for people to sort of reminisce about their past and a little bit about their present. And as Patti said, May didn't embellish or change what her readers wrote. She felt like she wanted to create an archive that people could have this body of knowledge that was collected by people and they were given credit. It wasn't all filtered through May Kennedy McCord. The Missouri Historical Review said in 1941, the column Hillbilly Heartbeats, which May Kennedy McCord conducts for the Springfield Daily News, is a reservoir for Ozark culture. Mrs. McCord, by recording notes about the superstitions, ballads, and history of the region, is doing much to preserve a rich heritage of the state that might otherwise be lost. That's pretty tall praise, I think, in 1941 from the Missouri Historical Society, their magazine. May died in February 21st, 1979, here in Springfield. I moved back to Springfield in August that year. So our ships didn't even pass in the night. You know. A few days after her death, there was an editorial in the Springfield Leader and Press, which was also picked up and printed the same day by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And among other things, it said, "We called her the Queen because of affection that bordered on the downright worshipful at times. She belongs to all of us in the Ozarks." So, next chapter.
Where are the Ozarks? The Ozarks country. In 1947, May was asked, where are the Ozarks? And she gave the definition according to the rivers, and I think that definition is what's used today. She said that the Ozarks are, let me get this right, boundaries of the Mississippi on the east, the Verdigris in Oklahoma on the west, the Arkansas on the south, and the St. Francis on the north. Now, modern scholars disagree a little bit with that. They still use the Mississippi River and the Arkansas River on the south, but the Missouri River as the northern boundary and the Grand or Neosho as the western boundary, as depicted on this map. So that's where the Ozark is, but the question is, who is a hillbilly? May said, there's something about living in the hills that makes you as independent as a tadpole's tail on its last wiggle. If an Ozarker tells you he will kill you, he will. If he tells you who's your friend, he is. Dialect was, of course, very common, and the hill people spoke in dialect, and much of May's writings really is in dialect. And there are many examples of the dialect in the book, and I'm not real good with it. So
this is in Patti's chapter, so she was supposed to read this next passage. And I kept saying, no, say it like this, and she finally said, well, you say it. Aunt Matt would sit and talk, and you'd rather hear her than go to a show by far. She used to say, here I work just like a gopher digging a hole from can see to can't see, daylight to dark. And Clem, consarn his old hide, he ain't worth the patching on his breeches. He's so stingy, he'd skin a flea for its hide and taller. And he never give me 1 penny to rub against another in his whole life. And he ain't got brains to grease a gimlet. He ain't even got mother wet. He gets down there to the crossroads and gets with them horse swappers, and they're so slick you can't even take your eyes off of them long enough to spit. And they'll work some of old wind-broke horse off on him that you have to carry uphill. The last old critter he traded for, well, I had to bake cornbread for it to eat. I tell you, it had no teeth. Clem ain't got the sense Moses give little apples.
And just on and on she would go, and it would take a native born and bred to understand her. And we have this: woe to anyone who criticizes a hillbilly. Of the hillbilly, May wrote, I'm of his tribe and his clan, and I love every bone in his body. And if I or any contributor of mine ever misrepresents the hillbilly, may the blackness of the desert hide us, the flea devour us, and our bones bleach till the judgment day.
I'm going to memorize that. I can use that, I'm sure.
And she said, if misrepresenting the hillbilly is what I am doing for the Ozarks, then someone take me to the creek and baptize me 3 times and lift me out twice. Chris, we're kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to
Okay. Want to skip to the poem at the end?
to the what?
To the end of the poem by Isabel?
Yeah,
Alderman?
this is something you probably all heard. It's just wonderful. It's this Isabel Alderman poem. We love our Ozarks best of all. So if you could have your druthers, a fellow says to me, if you could have your druthers, where would you druther be? Oh, if I could have my druthers, I says to him, says I'd rather live in the Ozarks where the rugged cliffs run high. That's sweet.
The good old days in the Ozarks, well, May had a lot to say about that. Times were hard. You know, the cabins were so cold that if you wanted to get bread dough to rise, you slept with it, hoping that the heat of your body would be enough to get the dough to rise. For recreation, the men would go sit on salt barrels at the general store from daylight till dark. But I think something that would interest you is a little bit about the view of Springfield at that time. As the Muslim turned his face toward Mecca, so we of the hills turned our faces toward Springfield. It was the rim of the world. Civilization began and ended there. You know, so even though she didn't want to leave Galena to move here, it was a nice place to visit. And a wealthy family or business partners of her dad, I think, brought her to Springfield. And her telling about her first visit to Springfield when she was just a young girl is worth reading. They ate at Cully's Cafe, and she got to have oysters on the half shell. So she says, so she was kind of high maintenance even then, you know. She had good taste. Patti, do you want to talk about well, one more thing about that. The call of the nativity never dies from the bosom of a hillbilly. When one gets one sniff of the jungle, he has to go back. You want to talk a little bit about the Iron Horse?
I do. You'll find a lot of stories in this book, and this is one of my favorites. This is about when the train came to Galena. In 1903, the great Iron Horse threatened to plant his hoof upon our peaceful little village, and excitement ran high. We could almost feel the hot breath from his fiery nostrils, and it was the thrill that comes once in a lifetime. To us hillbillies, they seemed human monsters, fearfully and wonderfully made. You who've never seen a train come for the first time through your village cannot even imagine what it's like. The thing that stands out most distinctly in my mind after all these years was the indifference of Aunt Ellie Plumley. She couldn't even talk about the pestering thing, only she did make one remark. She hoped to God it would run over Joel Harp's old sow and grease the thing for 40 miles. Well, Joel Harp had a sow, enough said. The sow was the most exasperating freelance that ever parted the hoof. She was half dog, hog, and half devil. She belonged to the original breed of razorbacks and was proud of it. I think she was the mother of the whole litter. She had a snout on her like a coyote, and she could root up a 40-acre field or pick a lock. She lived from 9 p.m. till 5 a.m. in the neighbors' backyards, rooting up the gardens, pulling the wash off the line, and turning over the swill buckets on the back porches. Well, we knew nothing about the new psychology in those days or the law of suggestions, but Aunt Ellie's wish did the job. The first locomotive that ever dashed into town raised that old hazel splitter's ire to the point of exasperation, and she made a wild rush for it. There wasn't even a pigtail left to cook with the sauerkraut. But verily, do we become great in our appetite? For when the grief of Joel subsided, he listed her as a pure Chester White. That old sister had about as much Chester White blood to her credit as a snake had bunions. Some lawyer worked on Uncle Joe for the old bewhiskered old climber didn't know a Chester White from a groundhog. He didn't even know how old he was or where he was born. Said it was about cucumber time. Nevertheless, he received the sum of $30 for his grief. So we've got lots of stories like this in the book.
I'm going to just sort of briefly describe crime and the law, or a little bit. May talks about hangings in the Ozarks, and there's, nobody's in a hurry to go be hanged. And they were hurrying this man up, and he said, "What in the same hell's the hurry? There won't be any hanging till I get there." That's kind of what I told Dr. Pulley. I saw her in the parking lot as I was pulling in. She was walking across, and she said, "You're going to make me late." And I said, "They won't start without us." So I thought of that. She talked about the bald knobbers. She talked about old Alf Bolin. She thinks that we'll always be remembered for the bald knobbers, and we probably are. And she said Uncle Saul Hembry down at Galena remembers seeing the head of Alf Bolin on a pole where it stuck for days at a little post, which is now Ozark, Missouri. That was kind of cool. Patti, tell them one thing about ghost stories.
Oh, you know what? It's quarter till.
Okay.
I'd really like to jump over to that article in Field and Stream.
Oh, yeah. Okay. She talks about the hornet spook light, among other things. So, okay, let me get there.
This gives you an idea of some of her stories in the book as we go through here.
We're getting close.
Okay.
This is an article from Field and Stream by May, published in 1936.
And some of it is in the book, but not all of it, because we had a copyright issue with them. We couldn't print the whole thing we wanted to. So I'm going to read part of it to you right now. Because I am the wife of an incurable fisherman, sometimes life is so funny to me that it's tragic. About 30 years ago, I started out on this nautical honeymoon, and I'd weathered it so far, so I guess I'd better stick. When you've hibernated with a river rat as long as I have, you're spoiled for anything else. My honeymoon was rather bluntly interrupted by my man running his trot line, which he set down on the butler hole. In fact, he always had one set. It was a chronic condition with him. From then on, it was a series of interruptions. So I married this man knowing that the fish worm oozed out through his very pores. You know, fishing's not a recreation. It's a serfdom. When the first warm spring days come, the bank of the James was lined, especially down to the old slough where the big perch hid. You put on the worm, spit on the bait, threw her in, sat back and waited on the Lord. And if you had a bank pole out, baited with a homing head, you had to keep a weather eye on the pole when it went bobbing. The enterprise was a little hard on the seat of the pants, but there was no overhead. We used to jump the fish in the boat when the water was at sort of a murky stage during the months of July or August. I wonder if any of you have ever jumped a fish. That's an Ozark sport, very common to us, but not believed by the great unwashed. We would get in the canoe and row idly down on the night. Someone sits in the front end of the boat with the light held down to the water. In the old days, it was a pine knot, and later it was a flashlight. That's progress for you. The fish get panicky, thinking they're going to get hemmed in between the bank and the boat, so they jump. And 9 times out of 10, they jump into the boat. Sometimes they go over. But she said that we would land 6 or 7 in an hour. Personally, I love to go jumping, though I'm not addicted to sitting on the bank with a pole for hours at a time, thinking of my sins. The curse of a fisherman follows him, for he begats fishermen. Here I am, the mother of 2 boys who began digging worms before they cut their stomach teeth. I spent so many years running up and down the river, hunting for the older one, yelling and threatening and scared to death that I wished 1,000 times the bottom would drop out of the whole blooming river. I have dried pants, shaken sand out of socks, untangled fish hooks from the bedclothes, picked up rubber boots, and burned fish heads until my country ought to award me an award for distinguished service.
It's a cool article. Give me 1 minute and I'll tell you what May thought about the article, though. Even though she wrote it, the magazine edited it and did the artwork for it and so forth. Last year, I had a humorous article published in a New York magazine about my own life as the wife of an Ozark fisherman. I wish you could have seen it when it got its fixings on. It was a scream. They drew the husband, down at the bottom there, going fishing, or rather baiting his hook with a broad grin. Only a mother could weep over him. He looked like a cross between a pallbearer and a bouncer in a swell nightclub. He had a $50 pipe in his mouth, rubber boots, which I suppose were like some of the artists had seen in a Broadway sporting goods window. He had striped pressed Duchess dinner looking pants and a black cutaway vest. The vest was hanging open and there gleamed a shirt stud of prodigious magnitude. Over his shoulder hung one of those fancy what-you-call-them bamboo baskets for the fish. Sitting looking at him, rather lonesome, was what was intended to be a Missouri hound. In the first place, just why the dog? And in the next place, you should have seen the dog. great big ears. The ears saved the day. I should have felt flattered because my spouse was fixed up for the first time in his life to look like one of those yacht-owning boys. But some way I wasn't. He and the story just didn't hang together. Well, this is going to break Patty's heart because she likes the music best of all. She would tell you that even though this is a book about May's writings, it's the music that she remembers most.
So because you need a reason to buy the book, we're not going to share everything with you tonight.
But if you buy the book, you'll see a letter from Carl Sandburg. You'll see a rough ballad that needs work.
In that box that I mentioned that I got out of the garage, there are so many ballads of hers, and you know they look like this. She collected this from somebody, or and you can see whatever came to her, she made marks on it. So we've got so much of that, and I just believe that there's a book there, but Chris and I are just too tired. We're not ready to do it. So I hope there's a scholar here who might consider doing that for some time.
You were going to tell them, too, that they can still listen to me. Wayne knows this and posted something just last week.
Right. You can still hear her singing on the internet. There are a lot of places where you can hear her ballads. In the 30s, she was recorded by a representative from the Library of Congress, and it's still available. And I don't understand how it's been preserved, but I've been able to hear some of those songs that other collectors or people who maybe gone in and used some sort of Dolby equipment or something to update the sound have been able to produce. So there's a lot of that's available from material in the Library of Congress, and of course there is the Max Hunter collection here at the university. And again, you'll hear her voice, and if you go online, you'll actually see the music and the words to some of her ballads. So I hope that some of you have that interest to do that.
The chapter on critters, we're not going to talk about that, even though I'm a critter person, and that was my chapter. Superstitions and granny cures. When a hillbilly can't sleep, he gets up and turns his shoes around. This is Patty's chapter, but I'll steal that line. I was glad to learn that because I've spent a fortune on melatonin over the years. And I didn't know that was all I needed to do. This is a delightful chapter because she talks about her husband in the spring. Every spring, while she's still in bed asleep, gets up early in the morning and goes out and burns off the garden, except he burns off her tulips and her verbenias, and then he digs fish worms in the middle of some of her flower bulbs that aren't up yet, and by the time she gets up, he's gone fishing. And it's a delightful little.
And I always think it's hilarious that you know the spouses are disagreeing, and usually you don't have these little family spats described in an article in the newspaper.
Yep. Well, and my favorite line from that: does anyone want a 6-foot, 185-pound husband to keep for odd chores around the house next spring during the weed burning season? If so, apply at 817 North Jefferson. There's a little bit about school, literary debates, and our favorite one was, and this is kids talking, and arguing about would women ever get to vote, and they just thought that was hysterical to even think that women might get to vote sometime. But May had gone as a child with her family for a couple of years to Arizona, where the doctor recommended that her father go for his health, and her mother got picked up by a neighbor and taken to vote in a school board election, I think, some kind of school election. And so I envisioned it as like us voting for the school board members, which we did earlier this month. And she would tell them that her mother had voted and it didn't make a bad woman out of her, and they would just laugh and they would argue that no woman would ever think of voting if she was any account. So remember that. She talks about going barefoot and so forth. This is a great picture. She did love hats. I've got several pictures of her with hats. Be kind and not judge what's in a woman's head by what's on it. That's good advice. She talks about Mother's Day, and it's sad what she has to say about that, because she has to wear a white rose now, or a white flower. I mean, if she could wear a red one still, meaning her mother was still alive, then she'd love Mother's Day. She'd always go home for it. But since she has to wear a white one, it's one of the saddest days of the year for her. She talks about May Day a little bit, because she was named for the month of May, and so it's her favorite month. Talks about Decoration Day, and at the end of that chapter she says, we come to the place that we have more friends laid there than we have left here. As the shadows lengthen one by one, we turn homeward. This is after decorating graves and having dinner on the grounds on Memorial Day. One by one, we turned homeward, each wondering somehow if the next year they would decorate graves or have theirs decorated. Talks about Christmas.
And above all, let us be happy this year. I wish for you a very Merry Christmas. I wish a little meat for the pot and a little cheer for the soul. Goodbye, and God keep you, and may the peace of heaven abide with you wherever you go and wherever you stray on holy, blessed Christmas Day.
Then, goodbye, my time's up. Just go right on and be good. Remember that the world's still hungry for the great simplicities, the sweet, commonplace things of life. Keep your faith, stick to the God of your fathers, and chins up in this old, worried old world. And I'll be seeing you, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. Well, Patti just got to town. We just got together yesterday, and I don't think we rehearsed this enough to know that we had enough. We'd be like the woman that wrote the article from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch or Chicago Tribune one, that if you're going to go visit May, take your bag with you, because she'll keep you entertained, not just for hours, but for days. And so we have enough here. We could keep you for several days. But take a few questions.
Question, raise your hand. This mic is for our online audience. We want to make sure they can hear the question as well.
We told them all they want to know, obviously. There's Wayne.
I'm going to be bold right off.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm going to be bold.
Okay.
Ask you a bold question. You
You're
talk
on.
about the boxes. You talk about the things that you used, a lot of the things you had that you've inherited. What are the odds that you're going to, at some point, donate all of those papers to MSU so that scholars, whoever, amateur scholars and professional scholars, can use them?
100%. And there are letters there from, like, I think I was talking to Tom, like, do you want the Carl Sandburg letter? Do you want the letters from Vance Randolph and Rose O'Neill and some of those kinds of things? Plus, just, she had a lot of manuscripts, and she would write a story, and then she would rewrite it, and then she'd write it again. And so I never really knew for sure which ones were published or which ones were not published and pulled out, but it's all there. And so we'd love to have anybody look at it who's interested in it.
I think that's extremely important, because people have no idea. Generally, people have no idea how important she was. And I wanted to say one thing about how she achieved that role. She had the venues that were the two biggest venues in the Ozarks. The Springfield newspapers, and I guess her editor was George Olds, probably of that whole time. And then, of course, KWTO was the biggest radio station with the greatest power. So those two things right there gave her the #1 position.
And I would also suggest, though, Wayne, that she liked to go out and talk to people. I did newspapers.com, where you can read all these things about what, entertaining, names. But she would go to Sir Coxey to something or another. She would go all over the place. And so I think not to support those major venues, she was just out with where the people were. And I think she loved those people. I think that was part of what she wanted to do with life.
One more question. you know, I went down to visit your brother at Reed Spring, and he had boxes of her radio scripts
Right.
that she had typed out, more or less, what she was planning on saying, and she would vary it. Do those still exist?
Not to my knowledge. I think those got lost, unfortunately.
And speaking of her having KWTO and that radio show to give her exposure, she, for a couple of years at least, would take the train, wasn't it, to St. Louis on Monday mornings and come back Friday nights, and had a radio show up there daily during the week. And they did a survey of their subscribers and who is the best, or who's your favorite or best known
Best known,
radio celebrity in St. Louis. And Dizzy Dean, who you may have heard of, came in third. May Kennedy McCord came in first. So,
Well, we appreciate your interest.
and we're in no hurry, so we hope to sign a book or two. And after that, if you think of something you want to talk about, we're here.
Thank you.